Take it away.
All right. Hello, my name is Brianna. If you are new here, also known as Dread Pirate Bree, and I'm the resident artist for Watercolor Snacks and also your instructor for today. So I posted in the mix group the little example piece. We're going to be doing an aquatic illustration because I realized that this palette is perfect for aquatic pieces. And we've got these jellyfish. And the thing I love about this is that we're going to be focusing on just a few key techniques. It's not very complicated, but that's the beauty of watercolor, is that we can get a lot of detail without too much effort. Again, this is why I love watercolor. It kind of does the work for you. So for starters, we're going to go ahead and take the petal brush. We're taking the petal brush because it is our largest brush in this set. And I also did post in the class prep that you were going to need a mister bottle. So either a spray bottle or a small mist bottle. If you don't have one, take a clean toothbrush. This does not look clean, but because this is my designated art toothbrush. So, and you can use this to create a splatter mist effect to a similar degree. So it's not quite the same, but it'll be the same in concept, just it takes a little bit more effort. So, all right, we're going to start by making a diluted blue before we even begin laying anything down. And I'm going to do the indanthrene blue. You are welcome to use the indigo, or you can change it up. So your jellyfish does not have to be green like mine. It can be red, or the brownish put mortem color. It can be blue. You can make it purple. You can do whatever you'd like. You do not have to stick with the same colors. The really key takeaway here is going to be the techniques that we use. So I'm just kind of adding some water with my brush into my palette. I clean it each time because I don't want my clean water to get contaminated. And we're just kind of taking this. Now you should have a swatch page available. And I'd say that's pretty good. So we're just trying to lighten it. We're not trying to aim for a specific consistency. We're just trying to lighten it. And now what we're going to be doing is we're going to be doing a wet on wet technique for the background. We're going to really be focusing on the outer edges. So don't worry too much about the middle. And you can either take your brush and apply water, or you can take a eyedropper and just add some droplets. I like this method because I feel like I can get a more even coating of water, especially with hot press paper, because I do realize that I notice a quicker dry time with hot press paper. And I'm not sure if that's brand specific, but in all the hot press papers that I have used thus far, it's been pretty consistent. So we've got, we're covering our whole page in water, and you want it to have just a little bit of a sheen. And I'm going to see if I can't show you here. Yeah, you can see that you can actually see my lighting right there. It's not a puddle, so it's not bubbled or anything like that, but it is nice and wet. And then from there, what you're going to do, I'm adding just a little bit more water to this paintbrush, and we're just going to start to dab in the corners. We're going to start to follow the corners, and I'm focusing mostly on the lower part of the piece because I want some contrast to happen. And you're going to see this blooming effect as you're adding it, and it's just kind of play around. You can even tilt your page to kind of direct the paint downwards more or upwards, and just kind of let it flow organically. I'm going to add a little bit up here in the top. Whatever consistency you have, you do want to make sure that it's not too dark. And you can fix that. If you find that you've added some colors a little bit too dark, just add a little bit of water to it. We don't want to have too much water because it will slow down our dry time, but that's not going to be the end of the world either. And I'm just kind of going around. I'm trying to keep the center kind of blank. I want it to be the lightest, the best focal point there. And then we've got all these. And what you can also do is taking a wet brush, I've dabbed out the extra drop of water, and you can actually just kind of direct some of the paint within those wet areas. Just kind of make sure that all the corners are nice and tight there. I love the little veins that are going up in the water. I think it's really fun. Another thing you can do is you can dry off all the excess water in your paint, and you can actually just go in and start to pick up color. You can just start to pick up some of the color there and create little white blotches. And while it's wet, it will dry soft because the water is still being absorbed into the paper. And this is just to kind of give it a little bit more texture, a bit more variation. And then if you really want to, what you can do, if you find that you kind of don't have a big enough white area, you can just take your paper towel and just lightly dab. Now you do want to be careful that your paper towel maybe doesn't have the tight corners like that. So if you can get it round like that, that works great. And you just kind of lightly dab it. I'm kind of going in a rotating motion because I don't want any harsh lines. There we go. All right. I'm going to try and angle this. I'm going to get something like that. Yes, definitely don't brush your teeth with a paint toothbrush. All right, now we have to wait for this to dry, and I can already see that the water is starting to absorb. So we're going to wait for this to dry before we can move on to the next part. But we're going to go ahead and practice the next part before we move on. And what the next part is we're going to be doing these, the heads of the jellyfish here. And we're going to be doing the same technique. It is the wet on wet. If you are still working on your background, don't worry about that. That's fine. I'm just kind of talking here. You don't have to do this part, but I like to do practice, and it's also just good for some warm-ups. And what we're going to do here is I'm just taking my brush and I'm going to just lay out an area, just kind of like a little round bulb. It's really, you can't tell with the camera lighting, unfortunately. Oh shoot, I forgot to prepare my color. We're going to prepare the color first before that. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to be taking the emerald green and adding some water to it, to just a little bit, because I still want to keep the vibrance, but I don't want it to be so vibrant that I can't work on top of it, because we're wanting to create layers. Right. That's a good consistency right there. So now we're going to go in and recreate that shape. And the reason why we're doing a warm-up for this particular piece is because we want to be able to create some color variation within the area while it is still wet. So I've got a little area, it's completely wet. You can probably kind of see it, the reflection of the lighting. And then taking your emerald green, or whatever color your jellyfish is going to be, this is going to be the base color of your jellyfish. I'm just going to lightly start adding it to the corners, right to the edges. And you'll notice it will bloom. And if it doesn't bloom, it means there's not enough water, but that's okay. It's not, that's not really a huge thing. I am utilizing the blooms where I can. And if I want to create a deeper contrast, I'm going to just add some more paint right up to the edges. And you can smooth out some of those areas. And I don't want to have the whole thing covered. We're not going for a flat wash at all. We're just trying to introduce some color to the area and kind of let it be a texture. I am going to absorb some of that extra water there with a dry paintbrush, dabbing away my extra moisture. And you can get some really good variations with the colors, just like that. And what we're doing is we're kind of creating the round effect of our jellyfish, because jellyfish are very fluid. They've got a lot of motion, and they have a lot of shape to them. And so by not having it as a solid color, if you have it as a solid color, it just looks like it looks like a piece of paper. But by adding some variations, kind of indicating that there's more color on one side and less color on another, but there's still kind of a rim there, kind of helps to give the illusion of something more round and more three-dimensional. Now we're going to do 2 of those, or if you only want to do 1 in your piece, that's okay too. I'd say this is dry enough. I'm not seeing any reflections, and it's not super cold to the touch. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to apply some of these jellyfish we're going to start the work on the jellyfish. And have fun with the shapes. Jellyfish are always moving. They're always moving. And so they're going to have different angles, and they're squishy. So maybe have one with a little bit more of a lopsided head and maybe one with a little bit more of a round one, just to kind of show some variation. And I am tilting my paper so I can see more about where the water is landing, so I can kind of shape the water there. We're gonna pretend we're airbenders from Avatar Last Airbender, if anybody's familiar with that cartoon. We're just gonna kind of pretend to shape water there. And I did remove a little bit of extra water from there because I didn't want it to be a full puddle. Now I'm gonna go ahead and add it along the edge. I am adding the color from the lower end of the jellyfish. Reason for this is I'm still trying to capture where shadow would be. And if this is going to have my light source is coming from up here, then the lightest part is going to be kind of the top of the jellyfish head right there, and indicating that shadow would be underneath. Now, mind you, jellyfish are very alien in nature, so you can kind of just bend and break all the rules you want with jellyfish. But for what I'm trying to achieve in my illustration, I'm wanting to kind of indicate that there is a light source. So I am kind of sticking with shadow. Now, if you know how to do glowing jellyfish, props to you. I don't. I love jellyfish though, because they're so versatile. And I just moved a little bit of the paint around. I didn't add any extra water or any extra paint. I just kind of took my brush and just kind of added it around. So we got this nice color started there. And I'm going to go ahead and add one, just a smaller one over here in the corner. I'm going to make this one a little bit more round. I haven't done a fully round one. Also, by adding the color right to your lines, right to the edge right there, it kind of shows you where your water line stops, which is very helpful. I'm adding just a little bit more to the top here, kind of dragging it around. Now we are going to have to let this one rest and kind of dry a little bit before moving on to the next step, but we're going to practice that next step as well, which is my favorite step of this piece. Honestly, I think it is the most fun, the most therapeutic. Then take an extra moment to just kind of play and push the color around. I'm not sure what the patterns of jellyfish are called, but I know that they can sometimes have patterns in their heads. So it like just mess around with the color to kind of indicate more variation. I'm going to give you a moment to wrap up this part. All right. So now for the next part, we're going to go ahead and practice this technique because it's going to take a little bit of learning. And you guys may have seen me post this tutorial before, and it's the mist splatter effect that we're going to use. So we're going to take the mister bottle or the toothbrush that you have, and I'm going to show you how you can use the toothbrush first, because the mister bottle is pretty self-explanatory. You just point and click. But the toothbrush, you're going to load it up with some water. And what you're going to do is you're actually just going to like fling it over onto your paper. It's going to go a little bit haywire all over the place. There's not quite as much control in the direction, but it will work to the same degree. And you can do that a few times. You can kind of see there is a little bit of remnants there because this is not a clean toothbrush. So you can kind of see the splatter effects. It kind of just goes haywire, but it works. So what we're going to do is we're going to get familiar with not just the mist bottle effect, but also the direction of it. So in this piece, what we're doing is we're kind of building this background layer right there. And we're going to use that with the mister bottle, but you'll notice that there is kind of a line. There's kind of a fluid line of where the tentacles are. They're trailing behind the jellyfish. So we're going to kind of recreate that. But with the mist bottle, it kind of goes everywhere in general. The idea with the mist bottle is you don't want to spray it so much that you just end up with a blob of large water. You want to kind of embrace the small splatter effects of it. So what we're going to do is you're just going to lightly, well, I don't know if there's lightly about it. We're going to do a few different sprays, and you want the variation. You want the little spots. You want the spots in there. And so we're just going to take that and take a color. I'm just going to use the indanthrene blue just to kind of indicate the color and whatnot. And you're just going to lightly dab in one area, and you're going to see it kind of spider out. I'm going to bring that up closer so you can see it. Oh, oh. The paper is wet. And you'll see that it's kind of spidering. And I'm going to try and direct this into a curve. And I'm just going to do that by literally just following a curve. Now you're going to see it branch out more, but don't worry, kind of just lean into that. Now we do have a large area of water, okay, right there where the splatters are just kind of multiplied into one cell, but that's okay. That's going to happen. We try to avoid that where we can, but that's okay. It's going to happen. And here is where you're just going to start to play around a little bit with it. And you're just going to kind of embrace it. This indicates because jellyfish tentacles are super detailed. They're kind of all over the place. And in order to recreate that texture without having to follow each individual line, we're going to just start with a large clumped area of it. And now here I'm starting to move into an area where there's less paint splatters. We're starting to move into dry paper area. And so I'm just kind of taking my brush, just the tip of the petal brush here, and I'm just going to kind of add some blotches here and there, just kind of overlapping. Now, look how this has kind of trailed off to the side. And what we're going to do with that is we're going to pick it up. I'm going to take I have a damp paper towel right here, which is perfectly fine. And we're just going to lightly dab at that. And if you find that it has too much of a harsh edge, just take your paintbrush and just kind of push it out. Just kind of dab it out. Kind of soften that edge. But here we're going to have a controlled chaos in a way. And we're just going to continue that. We're going to kind of overlap and kind of dot and dab here and there. It's kind of like a stippling effect, but less of a cohesive pattern. And we're just going to kind of bring that down and around. It's not going to be the exact same texture as your mist bottle, but it will work. And even if you don't have a mist bottle or a toothbrush to do this, you can just do it with the paintbrush. I just like to use the mist bottle because it has a bit more of an organic feel to it. And if you want to just blend some of these areas together so it's not as separated, go for it. And you can still kind of work on shaping those edges just a little bit more. Just kind of bring them back out. And I say, well, you need to have this, our jellyfish completely dry before this next part, because when you add this mister bottle, the water's just going to get everywhere. It's going to get everywhere, and it's going to start to blend into the head of your jellyfish, which is perfectly okay. But I want to kind of preserve that crispness there, that kind of defined difference between the two areas of the jellyfish body. And if you find that you've gotten a little bit too flat right there, you can just take some more color and just dab it right in between. The disperse of the color will kind of help to create a bit more of that contrast that we're looking for. And then the fun part, you can add more colors. You don't have to just do the one color. So on here, I'm going to add some emerald green, kind of allow it to spread out. Yeah. And the fun part is that it just kind of takes the color and kind of bleeds it out organically. And it creates a really beautiful texture that I love. And I thought was so much fun. I honestly haven't been able to get enough of this technique. So that's why we're doing it today. All right, so we're going to come back over here, kind of check. There's still some wet areas there. Another way that you can kind of channel your mist bottle or paintbrush is you can actually have a piece of scratch paper and you can kind of just, I'm not going to hold it against the paper, against my surface, because that's going to create a harsh edge. But what you are going to do is it's going to work as like a shield. And this kind of works in one direction. In fact, kind of like that. I think we're going to use that for our actual jellyfish because we can block it off from the actual head of the jellyfish right there. And do that. So taking this, I'm going to kind of curve my paper here. We're going to rotate it so you can see a little better. And we're just going to kind of, here we go. And I don't want it right up against the line right there. Did I forget to mix some color in? So we're going to mix an emerald green with, I'm going to use the indigo blue, but you can either mix a color. We just want to have a secondary color. It doesn't really matter which one. I'm choosing to make a deeper kind of bluish green to kind of contrast well with the actual jellyfish. So here I'm just kind of using the indigo blue to kind of offset it from the background a little bit, but still preserve that nice bluish green tone. This is going to be very, very heavy as far as application goes, but that works perfect. And we just want to have it ready because we're going to be kind of putting it in tandem with the emerald green. So here we go. I'm going to go ahead and just start to lay in little dabs here and there. And I'm not going right up to the jellyfish head right away. And we're just going to start to add it. Now I'm not getting as much bleeding out as I would like it to have. So we're just going to do another light little mist, because that's the thing, you can add another mist layer on top of your paint, which adds more to it. And we're just going to start to direct the tentacles towards the right. Kind of getting more narrow the further down that you go. That's the same concept with hair. Whenever you're drawing hair or tentacles or something like that, like a cluster of long strands of anything, it is always going to be thickest at the base, and it starts to thin out as you go down. You can apply that to hair if you're working with portrait illustration. The hair is always going to be thickest. So if you've got a strand of hair, it is always going to be the thickest the closer to the scalp that it is, and then it will thin out the further down that it goes. Now it looks a little spotty, a little blotchy, and that's okay. I'm just going to add a little bit of water and kind of stipple around to kind of blend some of those areas together. I love the preservation of the white specks though, and I don't want to lose too many of them. I just want to make them a little bit more like they belong to each other. You can even have some little strands just kind of going out on their own, kind of rogue hairs. All right. And now I'm going to continue that while it's still wet, but I'm going to be adding some of the shadow color with it. So I'm going to kind of take that bluish green. We're going to start to dab it in there because this is going to become our shadow tone right here. And I'm going to be spreading it out a little bit more further apart than the emerald green. And that's because I don't want it to dominate the emerald. I just want to indicate that it is, there's some variation, there's some overlap happening. There's some action going on. So I want to kind of show there's different colors. Now, if the head of your jellyfish is completely dry, then what you can also do is you can start to take that color and you can just bring it right up against the head of your jellyfish. I'm starting with the emerald green just to kind of lay the groundwork, but I'm going to be going in with my shadow color. And I'm going to be going in with my shadow color because I really want to showcase the contrast in the line between where one area of the body is and the other area is. smoothing that area out just a little bit. I'm going to bring it up close so you can kind of see. I know there's a lot of glare going on. You can kind of see that we've got that jellyfish started there. And now don't worry, because the speckled edges, like kind of where the breaks are in between the droplets of water, as your paint starts to dry, it absorbs into the water. You can kind of see it here already. It's going to have its own level of soft edges, and then some areas will be more, what's the word? Crisp. So you're gonna have some soft edges and some crisp edges, and we want that beautiful dance of the two of them.
I'm just going to pop in here, Bree. We are 30 minutes in, so you've got about an hour left.
All right.
If anybody has any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat or any comments or whatnot. Yeah, we may have time to do some like swatching or maybe some brush techniques at the end too.
Awesome. That works great. All right. So what the next thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to switch brushes. I'm going to grab my Princeton Lauren brush. And while we're waiting for this area to dry, because we want this area to dry before we work on these tentacles over here, we don't want the two to blend. What we're going to do is we're actually going to work on the head of the jellyfish here, and we're going to work on adding just a little bit more depth to it, a little bit more detail. And I'm doing that by taking our shadow color, and we're just going to add some water, not so much to dilute it, but more just to allow it a more free flowing. And what I'm going to do here is we're just going to do a few swipes. I'm kind of going, I'm following the outline of the jellyfish and just kind of going here and there. It's kind of, I kind of think of it like a pillow cushion where it's not super flat and it's got all these round depths and whatnot. And so I'm kind of following that just a little bit. And I'm kind of like, it reminds me of fabric folds and creases, kind of like in a pillow cushion. Bringing it up. And while it is wet, you rinse your brush, dab it out so it's just damp. And we're just going to soften some of these edges. Going to soften, you don't have to soften all of them, but we're just going to soften some of them, kind of leading upwards. Down. I'm keeping some areas completely untouched. Some of those jellyfish, again, they have those patterns, that kind of colorful patterns. And that's what I'm kind of trying to recreate. So we're going to go ahead and add a little bit more. It also kind of helps it to look a little bit more like a, we're going to get all scientific here, like a membrane of a cell. So it's kind of got that jelly coating right there. We're doing the same, just kind of adding a little bit of a curve, just following that curve to the top. And then just kind of dragging it down. There's definitely some water happening in this area, so it's going to be kind of soft, but the edge is going to be the most crisp part, and that is what we want. All right. We can do that same thing. We're actually going to wait to do that on the next jellyfish. What we're going to do now, we're going to take our shield. We're going to kind of use that to mist the second jellyfish here. And now I don't have it up against my surface, but I do have it enough where it's definitely going to prevent it from overlapping. Now I'm taking my petal brush. I'm using the petal brush specifically because it can hold more. We're just going to take that same technique and we're just going to follow it, but we're going to channel those tentacles to go in the opposite direction. And we're just doing a little stippling. It is kind of fanning out with the mist. there just a little bit. I've got a little bit of a dance going. Now it is a smaller jellyfish, whether it be in proportion to the front jellyfish or just a smaller one in general. So keep that in mind, but so the tentacles are not going to go as long. And that's okay. We're going to get some good dry time on these before adding the more detailed tentacles, which would be great. Going in while there's still some wet, we're going to add some shadow. You might, if you find that you picked up a diluted version of your darker color and it's not taking, it probably means there was too much water and not enough pigment. So then you just pull straight from the source. You just want these colors to dance. I'm just kind of creating that shadow a little bit right up there. Right, so here you can kind of see how this one is still really wet and this one is drying. And you can already see it's kind of starting to soften in its edges. And that has to do with the mist bottle there. Don't have the old toothbrush right now. Yes, okay, so let's salvage your tentacles there. I would say go ahead and take a paper towel. I'm going to reenact it just to kind of know where my own words are going. So if you sprayed it enough, it's kind of crazy, you have a puddle of water, I'd say go ahead and take a paper towel and start to dab it up. Dab up your puddle. Now, what this is going to do, you can even I'm assuming that your paper has been kind of sitting with this water for a little bit, which means that it's probably going to be damp, which means if you take some paint, I'm going to add the right consistency. You take some paint and you can start to lay it in. Now you already have a wet area and you're just going to start to stipple it in. The wet paper can still give the same bleeding effect. It can kind of dry out and absorb into it because it's already kind of got it laid out. It's just not sitting on top of water. It's just sitting on top of water soaked paint. So I would say just dab it up with a paintbrush and your paper's already damp and you can work with that. Just trying to work in the damp areas here. And you can just kind of stipple it down with your paintbrush. You don't have to use a mist bottle if it's too complicated. So they can be a little bit crazy. It took me a few tries the first time when I was using my mist bottle, and that's totally okay. You can even look at this great technique with the brush stroke. You can even kind of lay it onto its side. And it kind of like, as you're doing the stippling, you kind of get the skipping effect. Any way that we can preserve natural organic textures by just, and what I mean by that is just the paint and the brush kind of playing on the paper without much direction to indicate like it's a very pattern piece. And there we go. And it starts to work. You can even kind of go back and forth a little bit, although I think it's a little bit more of a crisscross action. What you do, there you go. You flip your paintbrush back and forth. And that works really great with the pedal brush because it is a flat brush. I hope this helps to salvage some of your tentacles. And then make sure that you add in your shadow color and you also kind of stipple in some water just to kind of blend the areas together. So you're not getting too many white spots. Hopefully that helps. While I'm waiting for those tentacles to dry, I'm going to go ahead and repeat the same shadow effect in the head of the jellyfish, but with the smaller one. No worries, Sherry. Now, do remember that this whole process can take some practice. So if it doesn't land right the first time, don't worry, it will come. You're right now, what you're doing is you're laying down the fundamentals of familiarizing yourself with the tool and how to work with the technique. So it can take a few tries. And I've got a lot of paint there. Well, more like water paint. So I have a very dry brush now. I'm going in to soften it. And when it's completely dry, you can go in and deepen some of the contrast over top of it. So I'm going to do some of that here with the larger jellyfish. I'm just kind of, again, kind of follow the edge. The edge is right there. Maybe not all the edges, but I'm going to take some of it, kind of follow the edges. And this is just simply doing some more building of the layers, building of the saturation in the color. The weather is starting to turn here. Just kind of doing light little brush strokes, kind of going in the same curved direction. And the reason for that is I want to indicate, if I go straight up and down, it doesn't really indicate much of a curve to the actual body of the jellyfish. So I want to kind of indicate that it's not flat, which means that whenever I'm spreading the color out, I'm going in these curved directions. All right. I'm going to give you a moment to wrap up that area, get to a good breaking point, and then we're going to do another warm up before moving on to the next part. All right. So what we're going to be working on next, while we're waiting for those areas to dry, is we're going to work on practicing some of the seaweed. And we're going to start with that. I'm going to use a carmine red for my seaweed because I want to show, I mean, I don't think seaweed is technically red, although there is some brown, it comes in all different kinds of colors. And we're going to be adding some water there because we want to dilute it. We don't want it to be too strong. And this color is very strong. So we wanted to add water to it to soften it a bit. I'd say that work. I'm going to add a little bit more water because we can always add more paint. We cannot always take away the vibrancy. I didn't want to add more paint. I wanted to add more water. All right. Looks the same. Oh, well. All right. Now, taking our Raphael brush. This is a really good detail brush. We're going to load it up with water and get some paint. And what we're going to do is we're just going to practice some squiggles. We're going to practice some squiggles. I want you to first start by just kind of practicing a wavy line. And it can be varying widths of the wave. So it's a little bit like wider here, and then it tapers off into something a little bit more narrow. And while that is still wet, we're going to go ahead and we're going to kind of parallel that line, except we're going to overlap and overlap and kind of create kind of like you ever see old 3D movies where the red and the blue, they have the same image, but one's red, one's blue, and it kind of parallels and it's just kind of shifted ever so slightly. That's kind of what we're trying to achieve. And what this is it's going to create a ribbon kind of effect. And these narrow edges right here, these narrow little corners, is right where you start to see it twist. And so we're going to fill it in. We're just going to block it in. I love doing just solid blocks of color. And I'm not even adding more paint. I'm just taking the moisture from the paint that I've already laid down. And we're just filling in those gaps. Think a ribbon. Think about a ribbon whenever you're folding the ribbon and you're twisting it, how a ribbon gets twisted. That's kind of what we're wanting to achieve. Right, so repeat that 2 more times to kind of get the hang of it. See how different you can make the wiggly lines be. I'm going to start in the opposite direction and do a little bit curve. Smooth out some of that line right there. And I do load up my paintbrush for the second stroke, just to make sure there is enough. And we're going to go ahead, we're going to overlap and overlap. Basically, every time the curve shifts, you're going to overlap it and kind of just go along the center. Let me go ahead and bring that up a little bit closer. I think you can see it okay, but we're going to show you. So right where the curve starts to happen is where you're overlapping your lines. I'm going to start from the ground up because the ground, the lower part is going to dry a lot quicker because it's more, it's a lot lighter in consistency. We're just going to kind of blend it together. And I love this because it's just kind of a fun, relaxing technique to do. I could make squiggly, wavy lines like this all day long. It is one of my favorites. We're going to do another one. Again, you can use whatever color you want. I'm going to do a bit of a curved.
Hey, Bree, it's Sarah jumping in here.
Yeah.
Can you give us a close-up of your ribbons here? They look so cool.
Thank you. There we go.
They're so delicate.
Mm-hmm. They're really fun. And by adding that second row of wave, like just parallel, it's the same line, they're just slightly off. It's the same line, they're just slightly off from each other. By adding that, it creates so much more depth to your piece, to your ribbon, to your line, to your seaweed, whatever it's called. I'm just going to fill that in. I'm just going to curve that one over. It's a very curly piece of seaweed because variation is good. And I totally meant to bring a ribbon with me today to kind of show you just kind of a example. Maybe I can do it with paper towel. Go ahead and work on your last little squiggly line, and I'm going to see if I can't make an example. And I only do this because, for my own sake, helps with my descriptions. We're going to make a faux ribbon here. All right, so now you have your ribbon. We're going to pretend it's just a piece of ribbon. And when you twist it, if you look, you can see that it's twisted. And you can see it's twisted because even though it's the same color, there is a shadow there. So what we're going to be trying to capture is the shadow that the ribbon kind of shows like that. So this way, and we're not going to be relying on line work for this. We're just going to be relying on some shadows. We're going to create the fold of our ribbons using a shadow. We're going to do that by taking the same color, the same base color that you started with, but I'm going to be adding another color to it. For this particular combination, the red, I feel like the kaput mortem works perfect. So I'm adding some of the kaput mortem to my red to kind of deepen it out a little bit. Always watch it. Yeah. And I'm just going to show you what it looks like in comparison to a straight carmine. Yeah, so that gives us our shadow color. If you're using blues or if you're using greens, use the neutral tint or the kaput mortem or just a deeper tone. And what we're going to do is we're taking the Lauren brush here. We're going to take a little bit. We don't want a whole lot of this because we're going to have to spread it out. What you're going to do is you're going to kind of find where the narrowest part of our seaweed is going to be, and you're going to follow that line with your brush. Now I have a lot of water and paint in this brush, so I'm just going to dry it out. I have the main line outlined right there. Main line laid down. And then what we're going to do here is we're going to just start to fade it out. So the darkest part is going to be right up against that curve, like right where the twist and the ribbon starts to happen. And then you're going to fade it down. We want to try and preserve that carmine red. But what we've done is we've created kind of that natural line work with just the shadow. And we're going to do that one more time, kind of with the next narrow crease, following where that line is going to be. We're making these twisty ribbon seaweed things. And the idea is to fade it out. If you don't get it right the first time, that's okay, because you're getting familiar with it. But this is really great practice to kind of work on how, like, fading out your colors. There is a lot of water still active right there. So we're going to start down here. You can even see, like, I'm warming up with this right now. This is allowing me time to kind of familiarize myself with the color, the paint distribution, and figuring out kind of where I need to. And if I need it to be a little bit more saturated right there, I'm just dabbing some color in while it's still wet. I'm going to start up here. The darkest part's going to be right up against that line, right up against that curve. And I'm going to hope that it is dry enough. Just adding these little areas gives it so much more depth in the shadows.
Please.
And if you really want to be ambitious, what you can also do is you can add a little bit of a shadow right into the ribbon. So if you have your ribbon, it's twisted. Sometimes it can have a little bit of a shadow going up in the center right there. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of just add a little bit, not a lot, just a little, and kind of fade that up, fade it into where it doesn't have any more definition. And there it can start to create a little bit more depth with your ribbon shape there. So we're going to take that now, we're going to apply that to the corners of our piece. We just want a little bit of seaweed, a little bit of friendly seaweed going on. I'm just going to use the Raphael brush because I can get the tightest details with it. We're going to start from left to right, or whichever one your dominant hand is, start on the opposite end. So if I'm right-handed, start on the left side. If you're lefty, start on the right. And work your way this way, because then you don't have to worry about your hands sitting in the paint. That's always a habit I'm trying to still form. So you're just going to start doing these little swoops. And then kind of parallel those swoops. I'm going to do another one, kind of in a different direction. And I'm kind of trying to have them meet at the base because seaweed kind of clusters, kind of builds the base there. Or I think there's different types of seaweed. It's hard to tell when it's all washed up on the beach. Now, when you're working with nature and any sort of organic matter, you always want to work with odd numbers, because that is how your eye can distinguish, like, that it's organic, it's not a pattern. So we're going to shoot for, I think, let's do 7. We're going to do 7 strands of seaweed here. And we're overlapping right on top of the blue, and that's totally fine, because it's going to be, it kind of gives the effect that it's kind of in the background or the foreground, but like it's not the predominant thing that we're focusing on. It's not the focal point. We're going to overlap those tentacles just ever so slightly, and that's also okay because seaweed gets everywhere. So now I'm going to need to let the seaweed dry before I add any more shadows to it. So in the meantime, what we're going to do, we're now going to go in and we're going to create these these other tentacles, these little bit more detailed tentacles. And we're going to use that by taking our shadow color. Drop the paper towel. We're going to take our shadow color here. We want to add enough water to it. So it's, again, so it's fluid, but not diluted. You don't want it to be so saturated that it just lays on like super dark. If you, a little bit of transparency is totally fine. But you just want it to be able to flow. So here, we're going to start to lay in, and we're going to kind of follow the same direction with these seaweed pieces. We're going to just kind of swoop them around, but we're going to overlap just a little bit more. Go ahead and just let's just say, go with the flow. Go with the flow of your paintbrush. We're starting and we're just kind of swooping, but there's no parallel lines this time. We start at the base and we're swooping. I'm going to kind of just overlap. We got 5 of them. That's perfect. And then what you're going to do is you're going to go ahead, you're going to take that color, you're going to start from the top, and you're going to start to add like these little, I don't know what you call them, these little loops. They're almost like loops, but they don't have like a hole in the center. So it's just going to kind of loop it down, kind of like a fancy ribbon. And you're just following it. And with every loop that I end with, I kind of start that as my next base point. I just kind of carry it on. Show you your loop here. You're going to start from the top of that. You're going to extend out. You're going to carry it back and loop around. You're going to do that again. You're going to start and carry it and loop around. You kind of create this scalloped edge. That's the word I'm looking for, a scalloped edge. And if you find that your scalloped edges are kind of blobbing together like that, use a little bit less paint in your brush. I think my brush is fairly loaded with paint right now, so it's kind of getting everywhere, but you use a little bit less paint in your brush. And I'm only doing one side. You can do both sides of the strands if you want, but I find that jellyfish tentacles are kind of all over the place. They're twisting, they're twirling, they're going all over. So it's kind of nice whenever you can just have one area to focus on. And I kind of just imagine it's like, yeah, this has probably got some other scalloped edges along the tentacles there, but I don't want to distract too much from my piece. So I'm just gonna pretend that I can see the other ones there, or that they're hidden, that they're kind of twisted. Just kind of going back and forth on each one. I am overlapping these because I don't want there to be any sort of distinguishable lines between the two, because they're just kind of all going over each other. Jellyfish are very transparent anyways. All right, now for the smaller jellyfish, I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm only going to do 3 tentacles there. So we're just going to do 1, 2, 3. Very little swoops. And if your scallops are too big, use less paint, less water.
Jumping in here, Bree, to give you a time update.
Sure.
We've got about 30 minutes left,
All right.
so we are doing good with time.
Perfect. I'm gonna let that rest. Go ahead and wrap up your tentacles there. I'm gonna go ahead and add a little bit more shadow into this smaller jellyfish because I can now do that. It wasn't dry earlier. The same thing for the big one, just to kind of emphasize the layers get smaller and smaller. I spread them out less and less with each layer because I want to kind of showcase it's like, hey, it's deeper in color. There we go. By now, our seaweed should be dry enough that we can add the variation with the shadows there. So taking the shadow seaweed color, adding some water to kind of loosen it up. If your palette, I know I've talked about this before, but if your palette is drying faster than you can use your water, you just take a mist bottle and you just spray it. It will help to reactivate your paints without diluting the paint in the actual palette. All right. Another side thing, I don't know if I've talked about this. Oftentimes when you see palettes, there are some palettes that are just a flat surface, but there are some where they have these individual areas. Now, part of that's to kind of keep the paint separated, but another part is that if you have too much paint in your brush, you can just slide it right there and all the extra paint will squeeze right out of it. I don't know if everybody knew that about paint palettes, but that's one of the reasons why there are grooves in the palettes. And there I get a much more controlled application of the color that I want. All right, I'm just gonna fade out that color, letting the darkest part be right along the crease, right along the edge right there. And I'm just gonna add a little bit more of a color right there.
Quick question popped up in the chat, Bree. What was the color of the jellyfish, emerald or indanthrene?
It's a little bit of both. The base color of the jellyfish that I use for like the head and everything like that is emerald. And then the shadow color is a combination of emerald and indigo. But you can use, I think this one I actually had emerald and indanthrene. So yeah, hopefully that helps. Almost done with the shadows of the seaweed right there. Yeah. All right. I'll give you a moment to wrap up with your seaweed there. Then I'm going to show you one last technique to apply to your piece. Now, the blue color in our background, the water, it's kind of less, it's not as vibrant, it's not as deep as it could be. And there's a purpose for that, because we can actually deepen out the color ourselves. So I'm going to go ahead, that is a damp-green blue that I have got there. I'm going to go ahead and pull some more of it. I'm going to kind of dilute it down real good. Real good now. Didn't need to add that much. I'm just going to skip a step and just squirt it with an eyedropper. Always swatch your piece, your paints before applying, and that'll work. All right. So now what we're going to do is we're going to start to create these bubbles around. And this is going to be a really great way to be able to indicate shadow. So we're going to be creating bubbles, but we're going to be using the negative space around the bubble rather than actually just focusing on the actual subject matter, which is the bubble. Now, how we're going to do that, I'm going to take my Raphael brush because it's got the tightest detail. I've got it wet, and I'm going to pull a little bit of color. And what you're going to do is you're going to pick an area. You're going to do these little clusters, and you're just going to, you want your brush to be pretty loaded with water because we want to be able to have it wet long enough so we can spread around it. You're going to draw a circle. You're going to start to expand that color around, and I'm going to draw another bubble right next to it. And I want this area to stay wet. So I'm just kind of adding some color right around it. And then with just water on a damp brush, we're going to go ahead and fade that out until we can't anymore. What this is doing is putting the darkest part at those bubbles right there. It's kind of showcasing those bubbles are there. I'm pretty sure that's a cat hair in my piece. Darn it. My cat's trying to make sure I don't forget them. Nope, I'll just have to rescue it later. All right, so we're going to go ahead and do that in a couple of different areas. I'm going to go ahead and do 3 of them up here, I think. And if you don't like it that dark, add some more water. So it's not as dark, as deep. So like up here, I wouldn't mind it being just a little bit lighter. So I'm going to go ahead, add my 3rd bubble there. But I'm definitely going to add some more water rather than paint. And we're just going to go ahead and start to bleed those out. Yeah. And I'm just kind of scrubbing it out. That's one of the best ways you can get a good fade, just by scrubbing it until all the moisture has dispersed into the paper. We're going to do a cup down low here. I think we're going to do 2 right there. Now, I don't mind if the color is deeper here, and that's just because we're in the lower part of our page, so we want it to be a little bit deeper in contrast. Just going to start to fan it out. I am going to switch my brush though, because this Raphael brush is great for detail, but it doesn't carry very well when you're trying to spread over a larger area. There we go. And I am going to just kind of take some of that damp green blue and just kind of dab around those areas. Maybe add some around the seaweed. And this is just a preference taste. I want to try and contrast the piece out a little bit more. So I have to be a little bit more careful about where I'm laying down my deeper blue. But I want to just kind of contrast it. You don't have to if you don't feel like your piece needs this. I just want to push my values a bit darker. Always push your darks darker and your lights lighter. So by adding a little bit more deepness into these corners, then we want, this will just kind of emphasize the lighter areas up at the top and kind of indicate where the shadow is, just kind of pinpointing that shadow a little bit more. And this doesn't need a lot, and you don't have to like be super pristine about it. It can just kind of indicate that there is more shadow there. It's just a bit deeper. And I only go until my paint can't go anymore, until my brush can't carry anymore, because just dry on dry. Go. That's looking good. And then same thing. I'm just going to point this out here in this piece right here. There's definitely a little bit more contrast going on as opposed to the tentacles here. And I'm going to fix that by taking my shadow color, even though it's dry, and we're just going to start to stipple in some of the shadow color, maybe a little bit lighter than what the tentacles are. And we're just going to kind of create a little bit more depth there. Again, kind of pushing those darks dark and those lights light. Then, as our last kind of final touch on this piece, we're going to add some splatter effect here. And you want to prepare your color ahead of time for this. I'm just going to use two. I'm going to use a very diluted emerald green and a very, very diluted indanthrene blue. The emerald green to kind of match the jellyfish, and then the indanthrene blue to allow for, or like to indicate for the water. Just pulling from those two colors. And I want them to be very faint, because I don't want it to be super, super loud whenever I splatter it. What we're going to do here is we're just going to load up your brush, make sure that the color is nice and wet, and just going to tap it. This will get all over the place. So I highly suggest you do this if you're at a place that is accepting for paint splatters, or you have a surface that can just kind of cover and protect everything. Same thing, kind of going with the emerald. You don't want too many splatters, just want a few. And it is on top of your jellyfish, and that is okay. It's also on top of the seaweed, and that is okay. But there we have our jellyfish illustration. Now, if you are still working on your piece, by all means, continue, go for it until you are satisfied. I am going to start the washi tape peel though, because I can't resist.
Looks like it came out amazing.
Thank you.
If anybody wants to share what they made, feel free to give me a wave. Or you want to put your virtual hand up. Everyone's looks awesome.
I always get a little bit nervous because I'm doing this while it's wet, but I'm too impatient.
I can see how that would be stressful.
It's literally waiting for water to dry or paint to dry.
Laura Lynn is just watching tonight. Totally fine.
Yeah, we're just glad you're here.
I technically was also just watching tonight, so.
Totally fine. Sometimes it's really beneficial to watch a lesson fully through before applying and practicing it.
It's funny, actually, now that you have it sort of like upside down,
Mhm.
it looks kind of like plants.
Little bit. I could see that, like little plant holders, and it's just like these little bundles of joy.
Mhm.
I love how art can be perceived in like all types of directions. It can be upright, it can be upside down, it can be sideways, and there can be something new to see from it every time.
While everybody is sort of finishing up, we have about 15 minutes. We may end a little bit early if people want to just continue working. But I do want to let everyone know about the marker sale that's happening. Bree did post a while ago about watercolor markers and her favorites. So definitely take advantage of the marker sale that's happening. It's 50% off all markers. Even if you want to branch, if you want to branch out of watercolor markers and into like alcohol markers or anything like that. The code is madness. I'll put it in the chat here and then it'll get you 50% off in the shop. So I'll supply you with the links and the codes in the chat. Oh, and we have a question. Any further sneak peeks for the spring watercolor snacks box? The carnival box.
The carnival box.
Anything you want to share?
Me?
I mean, we've just been talking about the color palette for weeks now. So
True.
have we shown the bottles yet? I know we've
No,
shown photos
we've shown
of
the
bottles.
pictures, but we haven't actually shown the bottles, which we can do that.
Yeah, let's do that.
Get a little bit familiar. Yeah, that's it. Move our lovely jellyfish friends to the side. Fling it. So here are all of the colors. The labels are
They
fun.
are so pretty.
These are a lot of fun. They're very vibrant. I'm very excited for Schminky watercolors because I've never been able to play with them before until now.
Yeah, a little behind the scenes about Schminky. They are pretty exclusive to Europe and Asia. It was a little difficult to get them in the US. So we pushed it off from a monthly box to a quarterly box on purpose so that we would have more time to make sure that they get in the country. So they're in the country, which is great. They're in the warehouse and being packaged now. So we're very excited to have them. And I think something that's really nice about these bottles compared to other like ink bottles, watercolor bottles, is that it's a thick plastic bottle as opposed to a glass bottle, which I think in my experience, less breakage, less mess, a little bit lighter to ship. Yeah, good comparison there.
Yeah, so here, this is the fun fact. This is the colors that we featured during the first winter box a year ago. And these are a glass bottle. These are the Dr. Peach Martin Hydrus watercolors. These are glass. And you've got these ones, which are just a nice firm plastic. I definitely don't worry about knocking the bottles next to each other when I put them back in the drawer. They play very nicely together. We picked a palette that would definitely complement each other. And the quality is really good. They even have the beads in there to kind of stir up and shake it well.
Big fan of those.
Oh, yes.
I don't think we were able to get any leftover bottles for the ArtStack shop. Like that's how exclusive they are to us. But if we have any leftover of this color palette, it'll be in the shop. But we couldn't expand the color palette. But I think you could probably find them at your local art supply store or some of the big name brands, or, you know, Amazon, where you can literally get anything. So, but if you want them in a box, keep up with Watercolor Snacks.
And I know that we've been talking a lot about, you know, the colors and these watercolors, but there is more stuff that is coming in the box. Like it's not just these colors. There's other things there.
All right. Anybody else want to share what they made? Hopefully our jellyfish are dry. Just want to give everyone the opportunity if they want to.
You definitely don't have to, but I always love seeing what you guys create because it's always so different.
I see Erin has her hand up. I'm gonna spotlight you, okay?
I posted it on Mix, but I was painting something else while we were learning, but I finished what I was doing. So I made a little white one on black paper, and it was so satisfying. It totally worked, kind of following that same pattern.
Love that.
I used a little bit of the emerald green in it. Worked really well. So yay, works on black paper too.
That's awesome. I love it. Thank you for sharing.
Awesome. All right. Well, you all know the drill. If you finish your piece, make sure to post it on ArtSnacks Mix so that we can see what it looks like. And if you are just watching tonight, this will be recorded and probably dropped on the Mix group tomorrow. My jellies are still wet. Yep, I totally understand, Angela.
Totally.
Wet jellies. Nobody wants wet jellies. Awesome. So I am gonna hand it to Bree. You have any last things you want to mention before we log off?
Thank you all so much for joining us with this adventure with the gemstone box. This is the last class for the gemstone box. Our next class will be featuring the carnival box, and I'm very excited. Although I'm very much going to miss working with this in class, but it's okay because these will live on. I'm very excited.
They look very well loved in your pan, so that's nice.
They are. I think they're some of them are like almost halfway down or close to.
Oh, nice. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. In the meantime, we will see you on ArtSnacks Mix.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.